My name is January Hill, and I am a bariatric surgeon. I'm in private practice in Macon, Georgia. And today I'm going to talk about taking the plunge into practice, challenges facing new surgeons. I'll be talking about the current job climate, as well as some general considerations new surgeons should think about as they're looking for a job, and briefly touch upon the employment in private practice model. I have no disclosures. This slide shows the type of surgical practice. It's based off a survey that the American College of Surgeons sent out last year, and they recently published this data. So out of all the surgeons that actually responded to this survey, approximately 75% are currently employed. Another 17% are in private practice, and the remaining 3% are practicing in a government service or military service. This is in contradistinction to a few years ago when most surgeons going out into the workforce actually went into private practice. So as you're looking for a job, you want to think about, what do you want? What are your priorities? And when I say that, I mean, are you interested in a certain type of lifestyle? Is there a certain location that appeals to you? And what are your family's needs? Do you desire to be close to your family? And also, what type of career path do you want? What are your ambitions? You also want to think about what type of practice setting you're interested in. Employed surgeons can choose different careers, either working for the government or military, or in community-based hospital programs, or even in academia, or you can go into private practice. You want to know your worth, and you do this by collecting data. The Medical Group Management Association actually publishes great data about surgeon salaries and compensation packages. They release this every year. While you're looking for a job, you want to learn about the market you are seeking employment in. You want to know the competitiveness of the hospital, and you want to see that this hospital has a positive margin of about 3 to 5%. That'll show you that the hospital is actually growing. The last thing you want to do is show up in a community that is essentially dead, and then you can't grow your practice. With contracts, it's really important to obtain legal counsel, and your colleagues or attendings could be a great source of who a good lawyer is. You can also get information from different medical and specialty societies that you may belong to. You want to make sure that lawyer actually practices in the same state you plan to practice in, because each state has different laws. And the last thing you want to do is make a negotiation error because that lawyer is not familiar with certain laws of that state. You also want to understand the role of your lawyer. You want them to explain the document, the contract to you in detail. Make sure you understand it clearly. You want to discuss if they're willing to make changes to the contract. Some people just want to have the contract explained. They don't want to make any changes. Others want to make changes. And finally, you want to decide what role you want the lawyer to play during a negotiation process. Some physicians like to negotiate directly with their employers. This is something I did. Other physicians prefer their lawyer to negotiate on their behalf with either the lawyer of their employer or even the employer directly. This adds up, of course. The cost of a lawyer ranges anywhere from $250 to $400 an hour, but it's money well worth well spent. You also want to make sure that everything that's important to you in that contract is well documented. A lot of larger institutions actually have very little flexibility in what changes they can make in the contract. I've learned this the hard way. So one way to get around it is by drafting a memorandum of understanding, or MOU. And this is complementary to the contract. It outlines the finer points of detail, such as scheduling, future raises, research opportunities, and even bonuses. While you're looking at the contracts, you need to make sure you understand the key components. This is not an exhaustive list. There are many different parts of the contract, but here are three very important points I just want to bring up. You want to know the responsibility of the employer and employee. You need to know what expectations your future employer has of you. When do you show up to work? How often are you working? What vacation time do you get? What are your clinical duties? On the flip side, you want to you want to know what the employer is going to do for you. So are they going to provide an adequate place to practice, give you the staff you need, etc. You also want to understand the concepts of termination with and without cause. Termination with cause usually means that you're let go based on some egregious infractions, such as losing your medical license, being caught in criminal activity, Medicare, Medicaid fraud, etc. Termination without cause is when one or both parties can separate ways without a specific reason. You want to understand the time frame. So what time, how much notice do you have to give that employer? And then you need to look to see what's affected when you leave. So does this affect your tail malpractice? Does this affect, do you actually owe money to your employer if you leave early for no specific reason? Finally, we can talk about negotiating. This is what everyone's always concerned about. And the key to that is knowing the market and your worth. Without knowing what you're worth, you can't bargain for more money or a bigger compensation package, because you don't even know what most of the other surgeons actually make in your area. And it's also important to have this what's called a BATNA, or a best alternative to a negotiated agreement. This is a very important tool in your arsenal when you're negotiating your first contract. And basically it's a course of action that you should take if the negotiation reaches an impasse. And you create the BATNA by listing and evaluating your alternatives to whatever provision that you're trying to negotiate in the contract. You select the best alternative with the highest value to you, and then you also calculate the what the lowest deal you're willing to accept and walk away. That way, it's like having a plan B and C, because you will go back and forth when you're negotiating with your employer. Now we're just going to briefly talk about pros and cons of the employment model and the private practice model. Just briefly, one of the beautiful things about being employed, you can decide whether or not you want to go into an academic or non-academic career. It's a little harder to do academic medicine when you're in private practice. You don't have to worry about overhead responsibilities such as payroll, billing, coding, etc., benefits. You're more likely to have a consistent income, and there's not the financial risks that are associated with private practice. On the flip side, you lose your autonomy. There's less flexibility with negotiating contracts and less flexibility in work hours. So this is, you lose your political power. You have to do what you're told. In private practice, one of the benefits is being your own boss as a small business owner. And as you grow your practice, you have the potential to negotiate insurance payer contracts. So if you become the biggest provider of a certain surgery or service in the area, you could go to that insurance company and tell them, hey, I am providing this valuable service. Most of the people who have your insurance are coming to me. This is what my services are worth. Also, you're able to potentially have multiple streams of revenue if you're in private practice. A little bit stickier and trickier to do that as an employed surgeon. One of the things you can do is consult with consult with companies like Medtronic, etc., Ethicon. You could teach, lecture. If you get proceeds from that, it gets a little trickier when you're employed. And obviously you could you can have your own ancillary services in your own office. And that's a little more difficult to do separately if you're employed. However, you have to deal with overhead responsibilities. And this is tied into the variable income and the financial risks. So in the world of COVID, even though everybody's taking a financial hit, private practices are like small businesses, and they're particularly vulnerable to the shutdowns. I'm actually going through my second round of elective cases being shut down. So this is extremely stressful. I have to worry about providing for my staff and paying for my overhead right now. If I was an academic or if I was employed, I wouldn't have to worry about that as much. I understand there are employed surgeons who are taking pay cuts, but I don't have that safety net in place. So to conclude, you need to know your value and do your research as you're looking for a new job. Decide what you want and negotiate what you want, and make sure the negotiations are documented. Here are some resources that are particularly helpful while you're looking to negotiate for a new job. And the American College of Surgeons puts out great primers about that. The White Coat Investor is a great online resource, and I have recently purchased Dr. Simpson Mason's book called The Doctor's Ultimate Guide to Contracts and Negotiations, Power Moves. I wish I would have had something like this a few years ago when I went after my first job.